Hello, I'm Gary Kidgell, the organising secretary of the Theosophical Society in Scotland. I'm both delighted and honoured to be giving this presentation entitled The Spiritual Path, during which I'm going to outline the principles and practices of what we refer to as the path of return or spiritual path. Helena Blavatsky states that there is a road, steep and thorny, beset with perils of every kind, but yet a road, and it leads to the very heart of the universe. This road, steep and thorny, is what we refer to as the path of return, or spiritual path. Theosophy symbolizes the spiritual path as a mountainous ascent, the mountain of initiation. And when treading the path, we have a choice between exploring and expressing our creative potential, which is itself challenging, or we can fast track our evolution by ascending the symbolic cliff face. If we undertake this route, we will undergo greater and considerably more arduous tests and trials. However, the magnificent vistas which open up to us in the form of vast expansions of consciousness render this process worthwhile. In doing so, we compact the learning experiences of many lives into a short few. Just as a mountaineer is prepared to persist in the face of inclement circumstances in the form of freezing cold temperatures and raging blizzards, so we must persevere in our spiritual endeavors, in the knowledge that our efforts here are of benefit to humanity and to the planetary consciousness as a whole. And importantly, we must be aware that the journey is the goal. It is the experiences along the way that result in expansions in our consciousness and elevations in our level of being. The zodiacal wheel plays a fundamental role throughout the entire journey of the soul through matter. Astrology and the great universal law of karma determine the circumstances of each of our incarnations. The soul incarnates in each zodiacal sign many times, seeking to learn every lesson that life in the material world has to offer. Capricorn is the zodiacal sign that rules spiritual initiation. And in a manner akin to the mountain goat, when we seek to ascend the cliff face of the mountain of initiation, we will be challenged towards progressing in a stealthy but assured manner, and at times symbolically clinging to a narrow precipice whilst all around us is crumbling. Such experience serves to educate us as to the futility of identifying with the transient objects and circumstances of the material world. The sign of Capricorn and its ruling planet Saturn govern patience, endurance, burdens, difficulties, isolation, self-discipline, responsibility, and success that endures. And these are hallmarks of the spiritual initiate in the form of the qualities that they demonstrate and the experiences they have undergone. Capricorn and Saturn rule synthesis and personality integration, which is a most necessary prelude to us being infused by the energies of the soul. It is not a coincidence that Capricorn rules the knees, which are a symbol of humility, and spiritual initiation will not occur unless we are prepared to metaphorically kneel as a means of receiving the energies transmitted by the initiatory rod. Each zodiacal sign possesses a key phrase. That of Capricorn is I use. And when we tread the path, we must utilize our various experiences in life, both objective and subjective, as a means of becoming integrated, becoming whole, as a prelude towards being infused by the energies of the soul. Now, a mountaineer would wish to take adequate preparation before embarking upon their ascent of a challenging summit. They would assure they had undertaken the required physical training, that they possessed the correct equipment, that they were aware of the nature of the terrain and the climatic conditions that would confront them. And similarly, when we tread the spiritual path, we must be adequately equipped in that we should possess the necessary knowledge in terms of who we are in essence and that which we are actually seeking to achieve. It is essential we are aware of the disciplines and practices of the path and their resulting effects as we seek to connect with and express the intent of the immortal aspect of our being. It is imperative that we understand the dynamics of our psyche and our relationship to the subjective realms of consciousness. Theosophy informs us that in essence, we are monads, indivisible sparks of the one flame divine, also referred to as the solar logos. Our entire solar system is viewed as the manifestation of this great being. And as a means of effecting spiritual growth, the solar logos projects its component parts, that is the monads, down the various planes of consciousness, ranging from the pure spiritual to the dense physical, this all being part of a vast evolutionary process. The monads are placed in matter as a means of unfolding previously latent spiritual qualities. Due to the purity of its vibration, the monad itself cannot descend down the various planes of consciousness, but rather it adopts mechanisms of expression to function on its behalf on the planes of consciousness below. What we refer to as the soul or higher self is a reflection of the monad. It serves as its instrument upon the planes of consciousness below. It exists for the purpose of unfolding its symbolic lotus petals of knowledge, love, and sacrifice. And this process involves a series of many lives in human form upon the wheel of rebirth. It is only when we have learned every lesson that life in human form has to offer that we are freed from the need to incarnate. We are then released from the wheel of rebirth, which has served its purpose then to unfold the symbolic lotus petals of the soul. This enables the monad, our spiritual essence, to obtain its objective during its long evolutionary sojourn. It must acquire what we refer to as spiritual staying power, this being our ability to radiate and express previously latent spiritual qualities despite the many challenges and constraints placed upon us by physical incarnation. The acquisition of spiritual staying power then contributes to the evolution of the great solar being that we are a part of. In his work Psychology and Alchemy, Carl Jung likened the immortal aspect of our being to a crystal lattice present as a potential form in solution and which first becomes visible in the process of crystallization, although such crystallization does not necessarily take place. The higher self is therefore not complete, but is present within all of us as a potentiality, and this can only become manifest through a specific process, that is, us undertaking the disciplines and practices of the spiritual path. This enables us to function as a spiritual instrument, expressing the qualities of the higher self in our everyday lives. In this respect, Jung's wife Emma and the eminent Jungian analyst Marie-Louise von Franz state, then how and by what means can the self become manifest? It is realized to that extent in which it is lived in the experience of daily life. The personality functions as the instrument of the soul. The personality is chosen as a means of expressing the qualities and the objectives of the soul in the lower worlds. The Latin word persona describes the mask worn by ancient Greek and Roman actors, indicating the role that they happen to be playing. Of course, this is a very apt description for the soul's mechanism. Indeed, we may consider all of the forms of our world to function as masks which obscure the one divine life, that is both immanent yet also transcendent of its own creation. Throughout the course of our many incarnations around the zodiacal wheel, we as personalities are slowly molded into a suitable receptacle for spiritual energy. We are driven around the zodiac life after life by our various desires for recognition, for security, for new experience, and for emotional response. The zodiacal wheel must rotate many times before our personality vehicles, that is, the physical, astral, and mental bodies, are fused into a coherent and integrated unit that can function on behalf of the soul. The symbol of the soul is a potter, molding the clay of personality upon the rotating wheel of rebirth is especially apt. And of course, it takes many lives for the higher self to fashion this suitable of an instrument of expression. The soul is seeking to create a metaphorical urn as both a receptacle and a dispenser of its spiritual energies. At this present stage of our evolution, most of humanity may be compared to urns that are under construction. The soft, malleable, symbolic clay of the personality must be gradually fashioned into a structure that will accord with and be aligned to the intent of the higher self. In our early incarnations, we learn by trial and error as we gradually develop the capacity to distinguish between right and wrong. At a much later stage than this, we experience what Theosophy refers to as divine unrest, when the affairs of our transient material world no longer satisfy nor sustain us. This is when the spiritual path beckons. We are then challenged to discriminate between the real and the unreal, that is, between matters which are truly spiritual and those which are transient. We seek to realize that in essence, we are part of a unified divine consciousness. We are immortal, and we must base our efforts and endeavors in life upon this great spiritual truth. The spiritual path is very challenging, and we must ally the factor of self-discipline to spiritual aspiration as a means of enabling us to persist in our efforts as we tread what is a razor-edge path between the outer and inner worlds. And we must be aware that the higher self will test us so that we may prove our worthiness as its instrument. The higher self will also seek to offload karma at a more rapid rate. And as we are slowly and progressively molded into a suitable spiritual receptacle, we become eligible for the next stage of the evolutionary process. This occurs when the symbolic urn of personality has been suitably shaped and molded and then placed into a kiln, representing what we call the burning ground of spiritual initiation. The urn is then rendered capable of fully receiving and dispensing the spiritual waters of the causal realms of consciousness. When the symbolic urn has been fired and thereafter solidified, when the Kundalini serpent, located within the Muladhara chakra at the base of the spine, ascends to the Sahasrara chakra, the thousand-petal lotus in the head region, one then becomes an exemplar of the archetypal process of spiritual transformation. We witness this in the lives of great souls who have preceded us, including Gautama Buddha, Socrates, Plato, Jesus of Nazareth, Shankara, H.P. Blavatsky, and Paramahansa Yogananda. Although it is formless, the wisdom teachings symbolize the soul as a lotus-like structure. As I said earlier, it is seeking to unfold its symbolic petals of knowledge, love, and sacrifice. Mahayana Buddhism talks of Sakavati, the realm of bliss. In Theosophy, we use the term Devashan. Sakavati is described as a lake containing many lotuses which represent the souls of humanity. And these lotuses are at various stages in terms of the opening of their petals and their ultimate flowering. Some are fully open, displaying their beauty and emitting their fragrance, whilst others are at the stage of budding. And the wisdom teachings state that the flower of the soul forms a bud in the case of a young soul, an opening lotus with 3 tiers of petals when one is treading the path, and a resplendent blossom containing a blazing, radiant jewel in the lotus in the spiritual initiate. The lotus has its roots in the earth. This represents our physical body and the realm in which this operates. The stem of the lotus grows in water, symbolizing the astral or emotional level of our being. The lotus flower opens above in the air, representing the level of the mind and its importance in terms of our spiritual growth. The symbolic lotus flower opens through its exposure to the rays of the sun. This represents our spiritual essence, the monad. The fact that the lotus flowers above the water suggests that when treading the path, we must develop the capacity to operate at a level above or beyond that of the emotions. If we can achieve this, we avoid what Indian teachings refer to as karma manas, or mind contaminated by desire. It is desire that binds us to the wheel of rebirth and to the maya or illusion of the lower worlds. Desire arises through our attachment to the transient objects and circumstances of the material world. We cannot express the immortal, enduring aspect of our being in life if our efforts are based upon the pursuit of matters which are impermanent. And this is a very important consideration when we tread the path. We must seek liberation from the hegemony of the astral body and its associated desires. Whilst desire is healthy for the developing soul, seeking for its personality to become more fully engaged with the material world, for one treading the spiritual path, desire must be overcome, transmuted into aspiration for matters of an eternal nature. By overcoming karma manas, we elevate our mind to the shining light of the higher self, whereby our personality may then function as its instrument. We do this by undertaking the interrelated spiritual disciplines, study of classical, esoteric, and religious teachings, meditation as a means of constructing the antakarana, the bridge between personality and soul, and through service to humanity and to the planet, without thought of recognition or reward. We also seek to express what Socrates described as the transcendentals, outlined by his student Plato as truth, beauty, and goodness. These qualities equate with the planes of the soul as described by Theosophy, described as Atma, Buddhi, and Manas. Helena Blavatsky's classic manual of spiritual instruction, The Voice of the Silence, states, "Kill out desire, but if thou killest it, take heed, lest from the dead it should again arise. Kill love of life, but if thou slayest Tana," meaning thirst, "let this not be for thirst of life eternal, but to replace the fleeting by the everlasting." So when we tread the path, a major emphasis is placed upon emotional control and the transmutation of desire. The energies of the astral plane are focused upon the solar plexus chakra located in the abdominal region. The astral body then synthesizes these forces, whereby we may use them effectively, either towards personal ends, including the pursuit of our various desires, or for the purpose of assisting the evolutionary process through forms of creative and spiritual expression. The key towards achieving the latter is through transmuting the energies of the solar plexus chakra into those of the heart chakra, its higher counterpart. So towards these ends, we seek to express qualities associated with the heart chakra. These are related to the Buddhic plane, whose qualities may be effectively summarized as love wisely applied and wisdom lovingly applied. The great Bulgarian spiritual teacher, Peter Dunov, considered God as the innermost principle of love, wisdom, and truth. He stated that God manifests as light in our minds, warmth in our hearts, and strength in our will, and the aim of life is the perfecting of love. Given that Theosophy informs us that our solar system is governed by the second ray of love wisdom, this is a most resonant statement. In respect of this objective of our solar system, Dunov states, "One day love will stand above everything. It will wipe out all defects. It is the only power that sets everything to rights. Leave everything to love. It will put everything right." So when treading the path, we are required to express heart chakra qualities. We must seek to express unconditional and inclusive forms of love, as opposed to the selfish or jealous forms of love orchestrated by the astral body and the energies of the astral plane. This does not mean that love of a personal nature is eliminated, but rather it is extended outwards to the degree where ultimately it becomes universal. We must strive to recognize and understand the situations of others and the various challenges they face in endeavoring to express spiritual qualities, as we feel and display compassion and empathy. And we should seek to practice harmlessness at the levels of thought, word, and deed. The practice of harmlessness serves as a very effective antidote towards creating difficult karma as we are confronted by challenges in our lives. It also, very importantly, serves to promote bright human relations. Discrimination is another heart chakra quality of great importance. We must cultivate our ability to discriminate between that which is spiritual and that which is transient. The practice of discrimination enables us to become free of the Maya of the lower worlds, whilst we are then able to express the energies and qualities of the soul. Indian teachings refer to this as Viveka. In his celebrated work, Viveka Chidamani, Adi Shankara describes the faculty of discrimination as the crown jewel amongst the essential qualities required for us to obtain. We must seek to perceive the underlying reality behind each and every outer form. It can assist us here if we create a division within ourselves, consisting of the doer or the observed and the witness or the observer. And when we adopt the role of the observer, we exercise self-remembrance. When we become aware of the impressions that circumstances and events in our lives create within us, we may react in a conscious rather than an unconscious manner. When undertaking this practice, we develop insight and understanding into the dynamics and the predispositions of our personality, and particularly the astral and mental bodies. This serves to undermine conditioned and mechanical responses. And when we tread the spiritual path, we must also, like the questing heroes of myth, display courage in facing whatever situations confront us in life, in the knowledge that these are relevant to our spiritual growth. In displaying courage, we overcome fear, which is located in the solar plexus chakra. Helena Blavatsky stated that when one treads the path, all that is good and all that is evil surface. Courage is therefore a most important quality as we are required to confront and overcome our lower nature, including what Theosophy refers to as the dweller on the threshold. The dweller on the threshold is the sum total of our lower nature, the effects here having been created over our many previous lives. The dweller is the aggregation of our fears and repressed and undesirable aspects of our character. And if we are to successfully scale the cliff face of the symbolic mountain, the dweller must be confronted and overcome. We deal with the dweller by confronting it and recognizing its contents. To achieve this, we are required to focus and concentrate our energies on our spiritual objectives. In doing so, we weaken and dissipate the dweller by causing its energy supply to cease. The dweller forms the negative vortex of a force field, of which we, as spiritual aspirants, are the positive and donative pole. And we must be aware that although we may achieve victories in our battles with the dweller will fight back. It will seek to highlight negative and challenging situations in our lives as a means of asserting its authority. The war is only won at the third initiation, where a fully integrated personality, stable under all situations of involvement with the material world, has scaled the symbolic mountain of initiation and is then ready to serve as an instrument of the soul. When the dweller is extinguished, it is replaced by what we call the angel of the presence, a representation of the soul. Theosophy describes how the initiate is then given a portion of the divine plan, this being the intent of the planetary consciousness. And this portion of the divine plan must be implemented on behalf of the evolutionary process. Integral to this process is the purification of our personality. The teachings of Advaita Vedanta employ the term vasana to describe behavioral tendencies or karmic imprints that influence our current behavior. These are derived from the impression of our previous lives, referred to as samskaras. It is the vasanas that give rise to vrittis, these being thoughts that are commonly stimulated by external causes related to our various desires. These great teachings employ the analogy of the personality of a mirror, being cleansed or needing to be cleansed of the dirt of its vasanas, so that it may reflect the light of the immortal aspect of our being, what these teachings refer to as the Atman. The voice of the silence offers warning against one treading the path whilst lacking in spiritual purity. Beware lest thou shouldest set a foot still soiled upon the ladder's lowest rung. Woe unto they who dare pollute one rung with miry feet. The foul and viscous mud will dry, become tenacious, then glue their feet unto the spot. And like a bird caught in the wily fowler's line, they will be stayed from further progress. Their vices will take shape and drag them down. Their sins will raise their voices, like as a jackal's laugh, and sob after the sun goes down. Their thoughts become an army, and bear them off a captive slave. Before we may attain the initiations that occur in our journey along what Socrates described as the jeweled way, I must emphasize the imperative of psychological integration, where our body, emotions, and mind function as one. When we possess an integrated personality, we are then no longer distracted from our spiritual purpose by the transitory affairs of the external world. Neither are we bound to it by our attachments and our various desires, but rather we function in conscious cooperation with the higher self, whilst being able to withstand the inevitable confrontation with the forces of the unconscious. To achieve personality integration and function as a spiritual instrument, our existing personality structure, with its various attitudes, predispositions, complexes, desires, and attachments, must be effectively deconstructed and thereafter reassembled at a higher point of consciousness. This allows us to function in an integrated way whereby we may then be safely and successfully energized by the soul. The medieval alchemists used the term solvi et coagula to describe this process. Solvi referring to the breaking down of components, and coagula relates to their reconstitution in a more purified form. This enabled the alchemists to attain what they referred to as the philosopher's stone, a symbol of the awakened higher self. And this is very challenging. In the Bhagavad Gita, the battlefield of Kurukshetra symbolizes the confrontation between our higher spiritual nature, represented by the good and righteous Pandava brothers, and the lower instinctual, desire-driven components of our psyche, represented by the self-serving Kauravas. The protagonist, the Pandava Arjuna, is initially petrified at the prospect of having to confront teachers, friends, and relatives among the ranks of the enemy. Similarly, when we tread the path, there are aspects of our psyche that require removal or transmutation. Some of these we may hold dear, but they must still be dealt with if we are to proceed further on our symbolic mountainous ascent. It is the charioteer Krishna, an incarnation of the god Vishnu, who offers Arjuna the advice that infuses him with the knowledge and courage that enables him to engage in the righteous and necessary conflict. And when we, through our spiritual disciplines, connect sufficiently with the higher self, we are then infused with its qualities and knowledge of our true nature, and this enables us to effect spiritual transformation. We may take an important step on our spiritual journey by recognizing that everything emanates from within. The innermost aspect of our being, the monad, is divine, and emanating from this divine source are qualities such as inspiration, aspiration, altruism, love, wisdom, compassion, self-sacrifice, and all other factors that can serve to ennoble humanity. The voice of the silence informs us that the mind is the slayer of the real. It stands between us and the higher self. In Buddhism, the undisciplined mind is metaphorically described as the chattering monkey due to its restless and unsettled nature. Our mind is in constant movement. It continually assumes the forms and colors of that which is presented to it by our five senses, by our imagination, our emotions, and our memory. And the constant chatter of the mind deafens us to the inner voice. And for the vast majority of humanity, most thoughts are driven by karma manas, as the astral body seeks to satisfy its various desires. The Advaita Vedanta teachings employ the analogy of a pond being rippled by the wind as a means of describing the machinations of the lower mind and its fascination with the objects and circumstances of the outer world. And when the wind causes ripples in the water, only broken images of the objects that surround the pool can be viewed as reflections. However, if the water is still, then the image of the objects that encircle the pond can be perceived in its entirety, and one may also see what is beneath the pond. The vast majority of humanity incorrectly identify with the splintered images that flicker on the pond's surface. And when we practice meditation, in accordance with the teachings of yoga, we are seeking to still the waters of the mind so that we may perceive our underlying divine essence. It is also important for us to be aware that the lower mind is anchored to the physical world of duality. It understands the objects and circumstances of our world through comparison, and it continually is caught between opposites that are largely self-created. Spiritual truth embraces rather than separates opposites. Spiritual truth is found not on the level of duality, but by the experience of the underlying oneness. Employing mythological symbolism, we are challenged, like the classical hero Jason in questing for the golden fleece, a symbol of the higher self. We are challenged to sail beyond the symplegades, the clashing rocks that symbolize the opposites of our manifest world. And when we seek spiritual transformation, it's important to be aware that matters in life that are particularly testing to the personality can be equally as elevating to the soul in terms of the realization of its purpose. Adversity represents opportunity on our spiritual journey, and we are reminded of the famous Shakespearean quote, "Sweet are the uses of adversity, which like the toad, ugly and venomous, wears yet a precious jewel in his head, and this our life, exempt from public haunt, finds tongues in trees, books in the running brooks, sermons in stone, and good in everything." Challenges serve to test us within the crucible of human experience, whilst offering us the opportunity towards enhancing our spiritual growth. And in the face of challenge and great difficulty, we must persist in our ascent of the symbolic mountain of initiation, in the knowledge that our efforts here benefit humanity and the planetary consciousness as a whole. We should be alive to opportunities presented to us and be mindful of the fact that spiritual development is achieved by virtue of our efforts and the purity of our motivations, and by the causes which we set and effect. Spiritual growth occurs at great depth. We don't necessarily see this on the surface. To conclude, I wish to emphasize that we exist within a dynamic, interconnected, and ever-changing universe, which is infused by the energies and qualities of an underlying subjective component, the one divine life. And as a means of us enacting our own existential evolutionary role within the body of this vast Leviathan, we must seek to attune ourselves to the universal heartbeat. And we can achieve this by undertaking the tried and tested spiritual practices I have outlined, so that we may become aligned to the intent of the soul, and therefore to that of the greater beings, planetary and solar, within which we reside. In his Yoga Sutras, the great sage Patanjali talks of the rain cloud of knowable things. This is a particularly apt metaphor for our new Aquarian age. Aquarius is the sign of the water bearer, who pours out the waters of knowledge for the benefit of humanity. It is my firm belief that we, as students and practitioners of the precepts of Theosophy, we are contributing, along with many others, towards the assembly of a metaphorical rain cloud of wisdom and spiritual truth. It is my dearest hope that one day this shall precipitate, helping to give birth to a new humanity for the purpose of creating a heaven on earth. Thank you.